Nobody warned the zookeepers about what they'd find that Tuesday morning. They'd done 1,000 routine checks, unlocked the same gates, walked the same gravel paths, called out the same names. But nothing in their years of training prepared them for the sight of Kibo, a 400-pound silverback gorilla, sitting absolutely still in the far corner of his enclosure, his massive shoulders curved inward like he was trying to make himself smaller, and cradled against his chest, tucked between his enormous forearm and his rib cage like something fragile and irreplaceable, was a tiny orange kitten. The kitten couldn't have been more than 4 weeks old. Eyes barely open. Paws the size of a thumbnail. It was pressing its face into Kibo's coarse black fur like it had always belonged there, like it had never once considered that it shouldn't. Senior keeper Mara Hensley stopped walking. She actually stopped breathing for a second. In 15 years of working with great apes, she had seen things that moved her. Moments of grief, moments of play, moments of startling intelligence. But she had never seen a silverback hold anything like that. Not with that kind of stillness, not with that particular quality of attention, like the whole world had been reduced to one small purring thing. She reached for her radio, then she stopped herself. Because Kibo, who had charged fences over far less, was watching her with dark, calm eyes. And he wasn't warning her away. He was watching her the way you watch someone when you need them to understand something without being told. What she didn't know yet was how that kitten got there, or why Kibo, an animal who had spent years barely tolerating human presence, was now prepared to fight the entire world to keep it. The security footage told part of the story. At 2:14 in the morning, a gap in the mesh barrier along the east wall, loosened by weeks of rain and rust, had let the kitten slip through from the neighboring groundskeeping shed where a stray cat had recently given birth. The mother hadn't followed. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe something startled her. The kitten had stumbled across 40 feet of open ground in the dark, completely blind to the danger, moving on pure instinct toward warmth. Kibo had been awake. He was often awake at night. The staff had noted it for months, chalking it up to age, to the subtle restlessness that sometimes settled into older males. He'd been sitting near the eastern tree line when the kitten crossed into his space. What happened next was not what anyone would have predicted. Kibo didn't move away. He didn't make a sound. He watched the kitten wobble toward him for a long moment, and then, slowly, with the kind of deliberate care that looked almost painful in an animal his size, he lowered one hand to the ground. The kitten walked right into it. Mara watched the footage 3 times. Her colleague Dev watched it without saying a single word, because what it showed wasn't aggression, and it wasn't indifference. It was something quieter than either of those things, and somehow far more difficult to explain. What none of them knew yet was what Kibo had lost 8 months before, and why a 4-week-old kitten, of all things, might have just walked straight into the middle of that wound. 8 months earlier, Kibo's companion of 11 years, a female named Seiza, had died unexpectedly from a cardiac condition the vets hadn't caught in time. They'd been inseparable, grooming each other, sleeping in proximity, communicating in the low, rumbling vocalizations that great apes use for comfort rather than conversation. After Seiza died, Kibo stopped eating well. He stopped engaging with enrichment activities. He sat for hours facing the same direction, and the staff learned quickly not to read that as aggression. It was grief. Plain, uncomplicated, devastating grief. The kind that doesn't need translation. They'd tried introductions with other animals. None of them took. Mara had written in her report that Kibo seemed to be waiting for something, though we cannot determine what. She read that line again the morning after finding him with the kitten, and something tightened in her chest. He hadn't been waiting for another gorilla. He hadn't been waiting for the pain to pass. He'd apparently been waiting for something small enough, vulnerable enough, and brave enough, in the completely accidental way that small creatures are brave, to simply choose him. But then the zoo director called a meeting, and the word protocol came up. And Mara realized that the most fragile thing in that enclosure might not be the kitten at all. Zoo policy was unambiguous. Non-compatible species could not share an enclosure. It didn't matter how the situation had arisen. It didn't matter what the footage showed. The kitten needed to be removed, evaluated, and relocated. The director wasn't unkind about it. He understood what Mara was trying to explain, but he also had liability frameworks and animal welfare standards and a board of trustees who would not look warmly on improvised cross-species cohabitation. Mara asked for 72 hours, just to observe, just to document. He gave her 48. She went back to the enclosure and watched Kibo for a long time. He was grooming the kitten now, gentle, methodical, the same gestures he'd once used with Seiza. The kitten was purring so loudly they could hear it from outside the observation glass. Dev leaned close to Mara and said quietly, "If we take it, he'll know." She didn't answer, because she already knew that too. The question she was turning over, the one that would keep her up that night, was whether what she was watching was an animal finding comfort or an animal finding a reason, and whether those two things were really different. She spent those 48 hours on the phone. She called behaviorists at 3 different research institutions. She emailed a primatologist in the Netherlands who had documented similar cross-species attachment behaviors in captive apes. She pulled every relevant case study she could find. What she learned surprised even her. There were documented cases, rare but real, of great apes forming lasting non-predatory bonds with smaller animals. Not out of confusion, not out of instinct misfiring, but out of something that the researchers described, carefully and with appropriate scientific hedging, as chosen attachment. The ape selecting a companion based on need, its own need, and then committing to that selection with the full weight of its social intelligence. Kibo wasn't confused about what the kitten was, he knew, and he'd chosen it anyway. Mara built her case carefully. She presented it calmly. She used words like psychological welfare and documented behavioral precedent and measurable enrichment outcomes. The director read every page. He asked 2 questions. Then he was quiet for a while. And then he said, "What would you need to make this work safely?" It took 3 weeks to properly engineer a secondary mesh barrier, a safe retreat space for the kitten with its own access points Kibo couldn't reach, veterinary sign-off, a formal behavioral monitoring plan with weekly assessments. The kitten, now named Moat, for reasons Mara never fully explained but that felt right, gained weight steadily. She learned quickly that Kibo's chest was the safest place in the enclosure. She also learned, with the confident stupidity of healthy young cats everywhere, that his ears were excellent for batting. Kibo tolerated this with extraordinary patience. The staff noticed that he was eating better, sleeping more regularly, engaging with enrichment activities he'd ignored for months. The behavioral reports shifted in tone, from withdrawn and non-responsive to alert and socially engaged. A volunteer named Theo, who had been at the zoo less than a year, asked Mara one afternoon why she thought Kibo had responded so strongly to something so small. She thought about it for a moment. "Because small things need protecting," she said. And he needed to be the one doing the protecting. Those 2 facts just happened to find each other. Theo nodded slowly. "And the kitten?" Mara looked through the glass at Moat, sprawled across Kibo's forearm in a patch of afternoon light, completely limp with contentment. She just needed somewhere warm to land. By the end of that year, Kibo and Moat had become the subject of a behavioral study that would eventually be published in a peer-reviewed journal. The footage was shared with researchers across 4 countries. None of them had seen a bond quite like it. Not because cross-species attachment was unheard of, but because of the specific documented quality of Kibo's investment. The gentleness, the consistency, the way he tracked her movements even when she was safely out of reach, keeping one eye on her the way you keep one eye on something you cannot bear to lose. Mara presented the study at a conference in Chicago the following spring. Afterward, a researcher approached her and asked what she thought the core finding actually was. Not scientifically, but as someone who had watched it happen. She took a breath. "I think grief is one of the loneliest things there is," she said. "And I think Kibo found out that the cure for loneliness isn't necessarily someone who's like you. It's someone who needs you, and someone you decide to need back." The researcher wrote that down. Back at the zoo, in the late afternoon quiet, a 400-pound silverback was lying on his side in a patch of fading light. A small orange cat was pressed against his chest, both of them breathing slowly, neither of them keeping score. Some things don't need to make sense to be exactly right.